Welcome to today's book study webinar on serving students who are homeless. This is our final meeting in a series of 4 webinars. My name is Zach Stumbo, and I'm the State Homeless Coordinator here at KDE. I'm excited to have you all here today. I'm excited to be joined by the author of the book, Dr. Ronald Hallett, and a doctoral student, William Wolke. Am I saying that correctly, William?
Yeah.
William Wolke. He's at the University of Delaware, and we'll hear more about his research and his interests later on. I'm grateful that they have both joined us today to share their expertise. Before we begin the book study, I'd like to review some of our expectations. This is designed to be interactive and engaging. We encourage you to ask questions and share thoughts and participate in discussions throughout the session. We want it to be very collaborative. And to ensure a smooth operation, just be mindful of a few norms. Remember that participating in all 4 sessions will satisfy your annual training requirement outlined in the Kentucky Administrative Regulations, and you will earn 4 hours of ELA credits. I will enter a sign-in sheet form that will serve as proof of your attendance today. Make sure that you do that. Today's video is recorded, and ensure that your video feed is not distracting should you keep it on. Please keep your audio muted unless you're asking a question, and please use the hand raising icon to gain the presenter's attention to ask a question. The chat function is available for question asking, but remember it will be part of the recorded content. At the end of the webinar, a link will be added to the chat for you to provide some feedback, and that is anonymous. That's why it's a separate link. Thank you once again for joining us today. And now I'd like to invite Dr. Hallett to get us started.
Thanks, Zach. Good morning, everybody. It's so good to get this opportunity to have another conversation with you. Today, the big idea that we're going to talk about is going to be preparing students for life after high school, which includes both transition to the workforce, and we're going to probably spend a little bit more time talking about how to prepare students for the potential transition to higher education. And by that, you'll see we mean kind of all the different options of higher education, whether that's trade school or community college, certificate programs, or of course, 4-year institutions. And we'll talk a little bit more about why we're gonna do that in just a minute. If you had any questions from the previous webinar that we had with Dr. Anna Bellis around community engagement or community mapping, or anything up to this point in the book, feel free to put that in the chat or to raise your hand. While you're thinking about that, I would like to introduce you to my colleague, William Wolke, who's going to be collaborating with me on this presentation. He's in his final year of the doctoral program. So, William, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Hallett. Hi, everyone. It's great to see you all today. My name is William Wolke, like Dr. Hallett said. So I'm a 4th-year doctoral candidate here at the University of Delaware. A lot of my work has to do with youth who are experiencing housing instability. And another bulk part of it is youth who are experiencing the foster care system and how they navigate different education systems. I know it says University of Delaware on there, and that's where I am at right now, but I was actually born and raised in East Tennessee, and I went to college in Kentucky. I went to Berea College in Eastern Kentucky, so it's great to be a little bit closer to home, even though we're in a Teams meeting today, but really excited to talk to you all and share some of our work.
Excellent. Thanks, William. You'll probably get to hear this. William has a real passion for lots of different things, but a real passion for rural communities, particularly in the Tennessee and Kentucky area. So I know he's pretty excited about this opportunity to come to connect with you all. William, would you like to give just a minute or two of what your focus is related to students in foster care and former foster care, and then we'll transition to this topic area.
Yes. Oh, thank you. So a lot of my work has to do with, like I said, how youth are navigating post-secondary education systems. As I was doing my doctoral studies, I noticed that it's well documented in the literature that outcomes aren't good whenever it comes to youth with foster care experience and higher education. We know the stats, we know all of that. But we also know that youth with these care experiences are in higher education, right? So I actually grew up in the foster care system. Now I'm here, right, at the University of Delaware, doing all this great higher education stuff. So there was a point where I was looking around, I was meeting other youth in care who are going through their educational journeys, and I'm realizing that no one is sharing their stories. These are extremely resilient, intelligent individuals, and I'm realizing that the narrative isn't always positive, and oftentimes it's not positive at all. So a lot of what my work tries to do is uncover the stories, the pathways, the positives that are associated with youth who are actually in these systems and what they're doing to overcome and defy some of the odds that are stacked against them. And so I really try to take a participatory approach in all the research and action I do. So really uplifting lived experience and voice along the way.
Thanks, William. And I would love to talk the whole hour about that and his incredible work, but we have another topic we're going to discuss today. William did do a TED Talk recently around his experiences and his work. So Zach, I could also share that if anybody's interested. I know there's a lot of overlap sometimes in some communities between students who are navigating housing insecurity and those that have foster care experience. So it could be another great resource. And of course, William's an incredible resource for you all if you'd like to talk more about that or get more resources. So today, this is the fourth topic area that this summer when Zach and I were looking at the book and talking a little bit about the great work that's happening in Kentucky that we decided to highlight. So the first edition of the book, which I think most of you have, has a chapter around how to support students in the transition after high school to other opportunities. Through conversations with many different people, including Zach a couple of years ago, we realized that we really needed to expand that portion of the book, provide more practical resources, and really help support states like Kentucky that have really increased the graduation and retention rates in high school to now start thinking, well, how do we help them be successful long term? And what might be the role of K-12? Of course, we can't do everything, but what are the parts that K-12 could do to help support students in that process? So that's what we're going to talk about today. Zach, I believe, also sent you some free resources that William and I developed. William's going to talk about those near the second half of this presentation, of what they are, why you might find them of interest, and how you could potentially use them when you're working with schools and districts as another tool or resource as we continue supporting students. Just before this webinar, Zach and I were chatting a little bit about what the transition rate is. I think he's going to do a little bit more exploration into the numbers and can follow up with you all. But roughly, it looks like, just a very tentative look, looks like there's been some growth in terms of transitioning students to higher education after graduation over the past couple of years. And right now you're hovering around the national average, around 29 to 30% of students are transitioning. But like I mentioned, Zach's going to dig in a little bit more and get you the correct information on that. So that's basically, it looks like that's basically where our starting point is here in Kentucky. So in terms of preparing students for life after high school, students experiencing homelessness, in the work that I have done over the past 20 years, consistently we hear that students say that they see higher education. And like I said, when I say higher ed, I mean all the different options of higher education, trade school, community college, four-year institutions, as really their pathway to long-term stability. I find this really inspiring when talking to students that they really value, even if though they're experiencing challenges in K-12, they really value those opportunities. And they see that continuing that would likely get them into a job with more gainful employment opportunities than if they don't continue. The challenge, though, is only about 15% of students transition to higher education as compared to about 52% of their peers. And And when I was mentioning the 29 to 30%, that's kind of looking at all students. So some go back later, but that direct transition is often a pretty low percentage rate. These students often lack the knowledge about how to prepare for or transition to higher ed. I remember one of the students that I was talking to when I was doing some work in the Los Angeles area was really talking about how she was just kind of navigating high school and hadn't really talked to an advisor and just assumed that after graduation she would start applying for college and that would be the right time frame to do it. Whereas, as many of us know, if you want to go to a four-year institution, you don't apply in July. She also really wanted to go to Cal State Long Beach, Cal State LA, which is kind of a local commuter campus. And she was like, well, if that doesn't work out, my backup is to go to the University of Southern California, which typically that would not be considered the backup to a local commuter school. But that's just one experience where you can see the really lack of understanding of how these systems work. And just that lack of understanding of the systems was really creating barriers for her to be able to make the choices that she was hoping to make. So they often also don't know what to expect once they get there. But they consistently, when we have studied students that once they get to college, recognize that the post-secondary education system actually provides more structure and hope for these students than if they just kind of try to find a minimum wage job while they're navigating housing insecurity. And consistently, I found, again, in my work for the past 20 years, that educators, all of you on this call, all the people you work with, play such an important role in supporting students and supporting their aspirations. Some of the students may want to work, so we're going to talk about, like, college isn't for everybody, or it's not the right choice right after high school for everybody. So some students might want to work. But again, how do you have those conversations and help them find something that they're going to make enough money to actually have stability? Others may want to transition into apprenticeship programs, which, you know, sometimes you can do that for like plumbing or becoming an electrician without the trade school. But by and large, when I talk to students in high school, they're talking about some sort of post-secondary degree or certificate, which is why we're going to lean a little bit more towards that area, because that's what we're hearing more when we talk to students. So one of the things that I have heard sometimes from educators when I talk about this topic is this idea that students probably should wait to achieve stable housing before they go to post-secondary education because they'll be more successful if they have stable housing first. In my work, what I've found is that students often couldn't get to the point of stable housing without those degrees or certificates that are going to give them the opportunity to make enough income. And if they do find that kind of just above minimum wage job that, you know, somewhat stabilizes them, then it becomes even more difficult for them to let go of that job so that they can then return to higher education because they're going to end up in the same position. So long term, they had this aspiration to get the degree or certificate, but if they don't do it pretty soon after high school, they kind of get stuck into this loop where it makes it more difficult. And for the students that go on to a four-year institution, they also might be able to stabilize their housing by living on campus. And even the students that go to community college with things like Pell Grants, state level grants, institutional support, and scholarships, again, they might be able to get some additional funding that'll help to stabilize their housing as part of their educational pursuits. So for the most part, I encourage kind of looking at the opportunities, getting students in a position where they can make a choice instead of assuming or discouraging students from that pursuit. Because until you apply for school and get your funding package and get your opportunities, you don't really know what the possibilities are going to be. So One of the things that you've heard me chat about over the past few webinars is the importance of this idea of holistic and coordinated support. This becomes super important when we talk about preparing for and transitioning to life after college, because it's going to take a lot of different pieces and elements put together for the student to be successful. William will chat about this a little bit more when we get to this tool that we developed. But the transition involves housing, employment, post-secondary education, budgeting, goal setting, healthcare, relational connections. All the different pieces are part of that transition. And we often have both different groups within K-12 as well as outside of K-12 that are helping with that process. So the more that's coordinated and the student is seeing how to put those pieces together, the more likely they're going to be successful. And like we've mentioned before, trying to get this coordination between different stakeholders is important, but it's also challenging because we don't know what all the pieces are or who always are the resources that are available for students. So in turning to the federal requirements under McKinney Vento of what is protected in terms of college preparation services, the first is immediate enrollment in support programs. So similar to the mandate related to extracurricular or co-curricular activities, students that are under McKinney-Vento should be immediately enrolled into college preparation and support programs. Now, if there are specific requirements like gifted and talented education or the like, they would have to qualify for those. But this is more thinking of the college preparation visits and conversations. And if you have a club or activities that are teaching students about college, they need to be included in those conversations. And that also similar to the extracurricular activities. If transportation is an issue, you can figuring out how to navigate that as a school or a district to make sure that they can get to and from that. Some of those activities are more embedded within classes or coursework, but you also might have these instances where it's a before or after school program or something over the summer. Schools and districts also need to remove barriers to programs related to college preparation. That means, the gifted and talented, advanced placement, technical education, extracurricular activities, and the like. So if a student does qualify for those, their experiences related to homelessness and housing insecurity can't be a reason for them to be excluded from that. Schools need to work to find ways to get those opportunities for those students. And in addition, the school and district needs to assist students with the free application for student aid, the FAFSA, which is the tool that is used to determine if students get Pell Grants, get different types of student loans. It also influences institutional grants, state level grants, and the like. And a key part of the provision is if you are a student experiencing homelessness under McKinney-Vento, you can qualify for independent status on the FAFSA, which basically means that you don't need your parental income and records to fill out that report. You can fill it out on your own. Now, by and large, if you're a student experiencing homelessness, that's not going to increase the amount of money that you're going to get. It's just going to reduce the challenges of filling out that form because your parents might not have all of the different information as they've moved around. And that independent status can continue once they get to higher education. They just need to be able to stay connected to the K-12 institution to do that verification every year. In terms of K-12 resources, the things that we highlight in the book is that higher education, educators in the high school system in particular can play a key role in encouragement and support, helping students get into these different dual enrollment and advanced placement courses. I'm not sure of the specifics in Kentucky, but there's been a massive growth in dual enrollment across the United States. Again, you're kind of getting free higher education, and getting students into those classes and having success can be an important gateway to higher education. They also get free waivers for placement exams like ACT and SAT. Also, there's waivers for applications to colleges. So all of those things are in place through like College Board and other places. And then students also need assistance kind of figuring out what the resource is or the campus is that they should go to.
And Dr. Hallett, one of the things that they can use their Title I or McKinney Vento dollars on, say a student wants to retake one of those tests and you can't get a waiver for a subsequent time, that is an allowable use of your local funding for that.
That's incredible. I mean, students tend to do a little bit better the second time they take an exam, and that can make a big difference in terms of where you go and how much money you get. That's an incredible resource for the state to have. In terms of, we're not going to go through all of these, but sometimes there's a concern about we're going to send students off to a post-secondary institution, and once they get there, there'll be nothing there to support them. There's been a real shift in higher education over the past 10 years where there's many more resources. I'm not going to go through all of them, but just a starting point is most campuses now have some sort of food pantry for students that they can access. Most higher education institutions will help students apply for SNAP or food stamps, or whatever it might be called in Kentucky. As a student in college, you actually are still able to qualify for that. They have financial aid specialists often that specifically look at the experiences of low-income students and students experiencing housing insecurity. There are also housing resources here in Long Beach. They even have like some emergency rooms for students if they experience housing insecurity during their time in school. So different institutions have different housing resources. And some campuses have very specialized services. So again, as students are even looking at where they're going to go, one of the conversation points might be, what are the resources that would be available for you if you go, so you'll be successful? And campus A may have a ton of resources, campus B may have less. And again, that can be one of the conversations that you can have with students to help guide them towards what will help them be most successful.
I noticed when I was at the University of Tennessee, they had clothing closets for professional internships or observations in the field for students. I think that's another one, or another cost barrier that sometimes comes up for students.
Absolutely. There's a couple of schools I've worked with too. They have the clothing closets, but some also through financial aid have these stipends that they'll give if you have an interview coming up or the like, to help purchase clothes, particularly if you can't find what you're looking for in the clothing space. So that's another great resource. You're right, Zach. All right. In terms of financial aid resources, there's actually quite a few. In terms of students experiencing homelessness, and I would say even more so with students that are exiting the foster care system, there's a ton of actually resources available for these students. They just might not know they're available. So I already mentioned FAFSA and the independent status. So if you're filing as an independent student, that means you're going to qualify likely the most financial aid, which likely will mean Pell Grant. It'll likely mean that if you get scholarships, they're subsidized, so you're not paying for interest while you're in college, and may even mean that the institution will have additional grants. Here in California, we have a California grant. You'd automatically be qualified for that. I'm not sure of the details in Kentucky, but like any of those state level things, once you get to the independent status, you're likely to be qualified for them.
That's for all of our unaccompanied homeless youth, the ones that you mark as unaccompanied, and feel free to reach out to me and I can help you come up with the documentation to send with those students.
Great. There's, like I mentioned, there's federal, state, and institutional grants. So even if the student for some reason doesn't qualify for Pell, but most of your students are going to, there's often institution grants where they're trying to support students. There might even be some specific scholarships. There's work study. There's internships and apprenticeships. There's really a wealth of different things. The loans on the bottom, I tend to be an advocate of lots of different opportunities. I went to school on loans because I wasn't a particularly good student in high school, and some of these resources weren't available. The students do need a little guidance with the loans because there are some loans that maybe aren't ideal, where you're paying very high interest rates and there's no kind of process of kind of getting out of those. So there's the federal loans, which are usually very good. There's some private loans where you'd want to have a conversation with a student and make sure they talk to a financial aid specialist before they signed up for those. And you definitely don't want students paying for these things on like credit cards or anything like that. I think Shelley mentioned the Opportunity House is located in Northern Kentucky University campus, specifically for students experiencing homelessness. UCLA has something similar where they actually bought a house, and it's for students that need support. So that's another great resource. So there's activities. This is very similar to what we talked about, Dr. Avelis and I talked about last month, but this is more specific to preparing for life after high school, where you can really identify at the school level, it could be at a county or a district level, but really starting at the place of identifying what are the preparation activities and resources available to students within and outside of school. So your high school might have things, but also you might have churches or community organizations, or the post-secondary institution might have these different opportunities for students. So first kind of mapping out like what even exists, and are students knowledgeable of this and taking advantage of it. Identify what workforce and apprenticeship opportunities are available in the local and state area. Identifying the campuses that exist and what programs they have within the region, and then looking at the funding sources for community and state, and then having a conversation about removing the barriers that exist for students that are identified under McKinney Vento. This can also be a great opportunity for the counselors, for homeroom teachers or teachers more broadly, to then have a conversation about how do we make sure all students know these resources exist, and even create like a flyer or a guide for counselors as they're sharing information, to make sure that we get this to students. Just as a broader perspective, it's useful for all students actually to have a lot of this information, because all of the students in high school are really trying to figure out what's going to come next. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to William, who's going to talk about a couple of resources that he and I developed over the past year, that are freely available, that you can kind of draw from as you're thinking about supporting schools and students.
Thank you, Dr. Hallett. And I'll just briefly say it's really interesting on my side of things as we go through those lists of things that may be helpful, or those conversations maybe that we could be having with our students. And I think back to my time in high school. I think back to, what benefited me whenever I was an undergrad. And I really can speak to how beneficial and how helpful having these conversations, letting students know what's out there for them, like how that can really transform lives, right? I remember just going through undergrad. I'm going through high school and like not even understanding what the FAFSA was, and having someone sit down and like explain it to me and show that there's some buttons I can click to make the process a lot easier, because I didn't know a lot of information. So I think just even encouraging the individuals that you work with to have those conversations is like super beneficial. So it's cool to see both sides. And so today, yeah, I'll be talking a little bit about the resources that we were able to develop. What I like about these is they are free, easy to access, and I believe that they're well informed. So obviously, this work is informed by Dr. Hallett and I. We put our heads together and we tried to create some things, but more so, I believe that these documents are informed by lived experience, right? So students that we've worked with who influence these documents. So during my time here at the University of Delaware, I've been able to work with students at all sides of the experience of in the education realm, right? So I've been able to work with students who are in shelters but are really passionate about school and are thinking about college but don't know where to start. I've talked with youth who are currently in college and they were able to reflect and answer some questions I had about, hey, what would have been helpful if you looked back? Like, what would you want when you were thinking about your transition to college? And I've been able to talk to students with lived experience in a variety of different areas after they've graduated. And I have been able to ask them the questions, hey, if we were creating a transition toolkit, what would have been helpful to you? So all of those conversations have gone to inform this document, well, these documents that I believe are pretty helpful. So I think they're pretty quick reads and I think they're good at resource. So right here, a huge part of this process is the idea that this is a collaborative student transition framework. Um, One thing that we felt was really important is providing joint decision-making processes between students and counselors and others in their support networks, right? And so this is helpful for a number of reasons. The one that I think is really important is giving students some autonomy, but also ownership over their college transition, right? And so it's putting them in the driver's seat of the education process. And so it's allowing them to make decisions, to brainstorm, to be able to be asked some questions that maybe they've never been asked before and think about their future in a way that isn't so much survival oriented, but maybe goal oriented as well. So the whole process is designed to facilitate a relationship between the educator and the students to foster more of a imaginative collection of ideas for future possibilities, but also to set some clear goals out, right? I think back in my time and the students I talked to as well, and it's being the opportunity to someone ask us what our goals are, and to be able to write those out, that's extremely transformative. And just having these conversations has been super helpful. So this like we imagine this 5-step process here, and a lot of it's building the relationship, developing the 11th grade plan, which we'll talk about in a little bit. This encourage and imagination space that occurs, just helping students explore different post-secondary high school paths, right, and set these goals. We know not every student is going to want to go to a 4-year institution. We know every student's not going to want to go to community college. Maybe they want to go to trade school. Maybe they want to pursue a different credential. But outlining the goals, letting them know what the possibilities are, and just allowing them to imagine has been super helpful. And then we have the next step is developing that 12th grade plan. So being like super specific about what we're going to do. Um, so the college transition plans that we developed, again, these were drawing from successful work with youth and foster care. So we developed a transition support tool for students in their final 2 years of high school. And I think it's really important that we have the junior year involved there as well, right? A lot of the youth that we work with, we see a lot of the starting to imagine, starting to make decisions taking place in that senior year. And as we all know, right, by senior year, we probably wanted to get the ball rolling a little bit earlier to make sure there's a smooth and safe transition taking place there. And this resource includes guidance for educators as well. It's a tool that students can use to plan for life after college. I've actually been able to use this tool working with students who are at independent living placements and shelters. I've been able to print this off and kind of work through this with them. So I think it's helping, right? I don't have any, can't say I have any definitive proof of that just yet. They're still juniors that we're working with, but they seem to like the process and find it pretty creative. And like Dr. Hallett was saying, this is a holistic approach, right? College for students who are systems impacted, that transition looks a whole lot different, right? What they have to worry about or think about is a lot different than maybe a traditional student. But also allows for productive advising meetings, right? Some structured advising meetings where we don't feel like we're trying to solve the whole world in one meeting. It's very structured, and it allows for again, the student have some accountability, right? So you're coming back with some things, the counselor's coming back with some things. So I think it's good in that way. And then again, I think this is beneficial for all students. I've been handing out this transition tool to a lot of people who are not systems impacted, and they found it helpful whenever it comes to their own process or even someone else's their children, right? A professor at our university, they're like, oh, I use this. I think this is pretty cool. It got some good conversation flowing. So I think it could be beneficial for a wide array of students. And then again, for the transition plan timeline, so it's separated by junior and senior year based conversations with different individuals. So the junior year focuses more on exploration, exposure, laying the groundwork, right? So I kind of see this as a time where we're imagining the possibilities, but also being informed about the possibilities, right? Whenever I was imagining my life after high school, what I saw around me, I didn't see a lot of people going to college. And so having a counselor, having an individual that was having those conversations with me, like, this is actually, I could see you here. Actually, this is what colleges are kind of like, or this is what trade school is like. And so allowing some space to explore and then asking me some questions about what I want and laying that groundwork was super helpful for students so far. And then in senior year, we see this more of the digging deep and actually following through on some of the goals that we've identified for junior year. So we're diving into the application process. We're getting all that documentation together. As we all know, sometimes getting that documentation takes a lot of time. And so starting that early in the senior year is great. And then the transition logistics, right? So being able to have conversations with the youth about what the different colleges maybe that they're going to or the programs they're going to may offer and how to take advantage of those, right? So not only that they exist, but how can you use those? How do you use the closing pantry? What might be some barriers to finding the food pantry on campus? Who do you need to talk to? How do you send an email to talk to them? And having all of those good conversations is super helpful. Again, so the toolkit is designed to allow students to reflect upon and identify resources related to many different aspects of their transition out of high school, right? And so we're not just talking about being dropped off at school one day and that's the only thing that you have to think about, right? So oftentimes in this transition, sometimes we see the need for a change in healthcare or the obtaining of healthcare in the first place, or identifying housing, stable and secure housing that is safe and that facilitates a healthy environment for learning. Employment, right? And so what does employment look like for the student during this educational journey of theirs, right? So is this employment from the school or is this employment outside of the school? And what are the pros and cons of that and potential barriers and facilitators to success? And then the last one is, I think, one of the last ones here is just education, right? So having conversations about what that transition to college looks like, right? That was, I remember being a part of my first undergrad semester, and somebody told me it was going to be tough, but they never expanded upon that. I just kind of rolled with the punches as I was in there. So having conversations about what that transition is like, and then just setting goals, right? So I think that's super important as well, having clear, defined goals that are actionable. And within this transition toolkit, this includes activities and advice for educators along the way. So we have in one of those documents, we have the transition toolkit filled with some kind of like tips, advice, and maybe questions that educators can ask students as they're going through this toolkit that may facilitate some good conversations. Another aspect of this is it enables students to reflect upon their strengths and aspirations, right? A lot of the conversations that sometimes are had are focused on what barriers we need to overcome. But what we really try to do here is identify the strengths and what do you have going for you? What is working well? What do you like? What are you good at? And things like that. So asking some of those questions that maybe they haven't been asked before. And then just identifying aspirations, right? So identifying what your goals are for the future, what you see for yourself, what could you see for yourself? All of those are super important. And then identifying points of contact for multiple aspects of this transition. And I really think this is super important for me. I had a social worker in my high school give me a note card of all the people that I could talk to on my college whenever I got to college. And it was 3 or 4 names in their emails, and I wasn't really good at sending emails, but I went and knocked on those people's doors and they helped me. So even having that note card, right, having that filled out and having somebody have that conversation about points of contact, I believe is super important for students during this transition. And then this does not need to be adopted exactly as written, right? So every student situation, very different. No one's going to come at the situation the exact same. People's needs are going to be completely different. This is just meant to be a starting point. We see so much good work going on. Dr. Hallett was telling me about all of the good things happening in Kentucky and like the stats. I'm just amazed by the stats and the good work being done. So this is just a way to keep that going and maybe improve those conversations a little bit. But it's just a way to push the work forward just a little bit if possible.
William, I would jump in on this last point. Sometimes when you get tools from related to education, they're copyrighted and you have to pay for them, and there's all those sorts of logistics. This is not what this is. We hope that if this is something you find useful, you could also transition it to your district or school kind of letterhead. You could, if there's categories missing that seem important, that you could add to them. So we hope this is more just like a point of inspiration. You could hand the tool out as is, but you could also just take it and reimagine it for your school. So we just give you that absolute permission to do that. It's not something we're trying to sell or anything like that.
Okay, great. Yeah, definitely not trying to sell anything here. So this is a little piece of the transition toolkit with the transition with the practitioner guiding questions listed here as well. So this is kind of like what using the toolkit would look like if individuals were sitting down with their students and kind of planning it out. You'll see in the junior year section, everything's, I would say, a little bit more vague, and it just serves as kind of a jumping off point, kind of seeing where the student currently stands, asking them questions that maybe they've never been asked before, and kind of just getting some inspiration going on in strengths-based, from a strengths-based approach. And we've tried to do it again from like a holistic approach. So realizing the unique and dynamic nature of these students, right? So you can see the different sections of these toolkits, right? So section 1, education, section 2, employment, and then you have housing, wellness and self-care, community connection and support, life skills, and other needs. And I'll really highlight one thing I thought was really interesting is how well the students have been responding so far to that community connection and support piece, right? Oftentimes when we ask, who is your community? Who is your support? The first response I usually get is a shrug of shoulders and things like that. And maybe my friends or maybe this person that I know, maybe this teacher. But when students are given the time, I say, take this home and then come back, in 2 weeks and see what we have. I'm seeing students really kind of get involved with that question, and they're identifying the different sources of community and capital that they have going on in their own lives, and then also the life skills, right? And so students have been able to identify some life skills maybe that they need to work on, or maybe that they're really great. They do really great work with already. I asked one student, I'm like, are you worried about cooking? And they're like, oh, no, I'm not worried about cooking at all. I do this all the time. And then they brought me some food next time to prove that. And they were not, they were a very good cook, but they didn't know like how to wash clothes. So they're like, maybe I could ask somebody how to wash clothes. That could be good. So I've seen, and I think it improves the students' like ideas of what a transition may look like or be. And then you see in the senior year one, we get a little bit more specific. We keep those same 6 domains, those same 6 holistic domains, but we're really trying to get the students to get a little bit more specific whenever it comes to their answers and what is needed for their specific transition. And so specifically, right, how we look at the junior versus the senior year ideas here is we see the junior year as a space to identify these goals and strengthen their strengths and then also their areas of interest, right? So what are you interested in and what does that look like from a career or education point of view, right? You really know that you're really good at the computer and you really like that, but how does that translate to your strengths? How does that translate to your goals at the end of the day? And this serves as a jumping off point to these structured conversations about the different options in the post-secondary space, right? There's tons of options. Also, we see these conversations about dual enrollment, career and technical education, apprenticeship awareness, and eligibility checks, right? So what are you eligible for right now? What are your options? What could make this transition easier? And then this resource mapping, right? So what your resources look like, they could look like. And so just allowing students to see what they have that's available to them, and then introducing the FAFSA, the basics. And I really think it's so important. Looking back on my journey, I wish somebody would have sat me down and like talked about the FAFSA in my junior year, so we could have gotten that conversation going. There's a lot of things I didn't know and kind of figured out along the way. So I think that's really important. And then you're just building the first draft of the plan toolkit. And what we really think is important here is the looping in of the McKinney-Vento liaisons, the counselor, the CTE staff, and the community-based organizations, right? So, and that's why I think this actually being a structured document is great, right? So everyone can kind of know what's going on, and this can be a collaborative process as well.
And this might also, I just want to name, this might feel overwhelming, but how it's developed, hopefully the student does some of this work. And then when you meet them with them, if the council only has 10 or 15 minutes, it's a more productive 10 or 15 minutes because they've done some work. And you can also point them to these different people in their network to go have continued conversations. So I just want to name, it's not about this person trying to do all of this work. It's providing the tool and support for the student to do it and then have productive conversations with you.
And then again, in the senior year, we see a shift from exploring those options to securing the needed documentation, completing applications, and finalizing that transition plan. So really wrapping things up and making sure that we have a good, stable transition taking place. And again, so in senior year, I see this as a time of like connection and completion. So completing the FAFSA, securing that independent status verification, and then finalizing the whatever pathway it is. So making sure that that's finalized, applying for scholarships, fee waivers, and institutional supports, confirming housing, connecting students to basic need programs on campuses of interest. Like I said, that was super helpful for me. And then completing the transition plan tool and sharing copies with the student support team and establishing a summer transition plan, including housing, financial aid, contacts, deadlines, all of that good stuff. And then looping in financial aid offices, trio support services, housing contacts, campus basic needs teams. So as much as we can, keeping everyone on the same page that that student is arriving, and how can we kind of have a handoff that is safe and that promotes student success at the end of the day. And again, like Dr. Hallett was saying, it's not that what I've seen when actually using this tool, a lot of it's just me going through the forms with the students and handing it to them, and then coming back to me a couple weeks later and having questions and kind of having dialogue about that. And it makes the conversation just flow a little bit better and kind of not feel so scattered and more directed.
And the nice part about this tool too is it could be something where the counselor or the teacher, whoever is doing it with the student, keeps a copy, but the student also keeps a copy. And that way, when the student transitions to potentially different schools or the like, they already have kind of a tool with them to keep the conversation moving forward. They also have some contact points they could reach out to. So I know we try as hard as we can to keep students stabilized to one school, especially in high school, but there's still some transitions that happen. So this is a great way for them to be empowered a little bit along the way too.
Yeah, and then so who can use this transition plan tool? So we tried to identify some individuals or organizations that we think might find this helpful. The first one being high school guidance counselors, right? So super busy folks from what I understand. So anything to make these conversations a little bit more structured and hopefully a little bit easier at the end of the day, that's always great. College prep teachers and mentors, community partners. I really think of independent living placements, areas where, when it comes to shelters, anything like that, where they're offering maybe some workshops for students and things like that. Family, guardians, and other important individuals, right, in the student's life. So this can just be what I like about this tool, because I really believe that anyone can use it, right? And so right now, I know of a father, daughter who are using this toolkit right now to help brainstorm their options for her college transition. So it's been super great to see them do that. And the school or districts could integrate this into their curriculum, right? And so kind of showcasing more of the potential of what this toolkit can do for the district. And then, like Dr. Howe said, the recommendation here is students and educators should both keep a copy, right? And I think that helps everyone plan a little bit better to make sure those meetings are a little bit more productive and structured.
And we've developed this particularly for this conversation related to students experiencing homelessness. But all of these issues are things that all students probably have to think about. And it can be a little tricky to just hand the transition plan to students that are identified as McKinney Vento, you absolutely could do that. But I'm working with a couple of school districts in the Midwest that are looking at adopting this broadly, so that again, their counselors have more productive conversations. I want to highlight one piece of this plan that I find really important. Some of my work has really looked at the transition, the access to college, and we lose a ton of students between high school graduation and the start of college. There's actually a term for it. It's called summer melt. It's students that have been accepted for higher education, but over the summer they get all the paperwork around housing and financial aid and classes and the like. And high school counselors are often off contract, but they haven't developed a close relationship with anyone on campus. So when these forms come in, they don't know who to ask. And we end up losing, a pretty big chunk of students that are low income during that time. So this transition plan, a part of that is even who are you going to contact over the summer if you have questions? Who are the people on campus that you could contact? Does the school or the district, I know of some schools that have a counselor that works for a portion of the summer just for this reason to help students. Other districts or schools don't have that resource. So before you kind of send them off, who would be available for you over the summer and your first semester of college when you have these questions? So this is kind of a broad view of this idea of preparing students for life after college. Lori also put another resource that has been created that they use in their district or county. So I encourage you to look at that. But we hope that this resource is just another tool that you could use. It could also be something that you share with educational leaders, and it just starts a conversation, even if you don't adopt the tool as is. But like, how are we preparing students for these things and empowering them? It's just a more practical way to kind of look at the things that students would need to have to be successful as they transition to life after. So I see we have a couple of minutes if there's questions, or if you have additional resources related to this topic area that are specific to Kentucky or that you've seen, it'd be great to share those with your colleagues too.
Yeah, I'm going to, as a reminder, I want to make sure that everyone has filled out their form showing that you're here today so that Jennifer and I can give you credit. I'm going to drop that one more time into the format. That first one is to sign in, and then I'm also going to drop in the link for the feedback. And the feedback is anonymous. We just use that to help us pick out other professional learning opportunities like this. Feedback, I'll put that one in. We want to ask you to do that. We have a few more minutes, and I always budget extra time over if anybody would like to ask any questions. How about this? I will end the recording now, and that way if people have questions that they don't want to ask, we can do that.